Thank you, Emily, and good evening. It is a great pleasure to introduce William Seale. I have known William for a very long time because he married my good friend and college classmate, Lucinda Smith. I married a brilliant historian, and so did she. William Seale is a charming and witty Texas gentleman whose interest in history and buildings has fueled a long career in both. He is a native of Beaumont, Texas, holds a BA from Southwestern University, an MA and a PhD from Duke. He left Texas in 1969 and spent 2 years in Columbia, South Carolina, restoring the home of Wade Hampton. He then came to Washington in 1972 to write a history of state capitals with Henry Russell Hitchcock. He, Lucinda, and their 2 sons settled in Lucinda's native Alexandria. At this point in his career, he focused on 2 things: historic restoration and writing. His 2-volume History of the White House was published by the White House Historical Society in 1986, with a second edition in 1996. He is the editor of the association's journal, White House History. His other books include an architectural history of the White House, history of the National Trust Houses, temples of democracy, the state capitals of the USA, and American courthouses. A commissioned book, The Garden Club of America, A History, was published earlier this year. His restoration participations include 11 state capitals and various houses such as that of George Eastman, General Marshall, and the Wisconsin retreat, 10 Chimneys, of the Broadway actors Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine. Tonight he will speak on his new book, a book about Washington, The Imperial Season, America's capital in the time of the first ambassadors. Not surprisingly, his studies led him here to Anderson House to cross paths with Lars and Isabel, who readily joined the cast of The Imperial Season. William Seale.
Well, Hannah, thank you. And it's great to see you all here. I don't know what Hannah had to pay each of you to come, but she's very inventive. So it is wonderful to be here and to be in this house that's so much a part of the story, and certainly one of the most opulent of all of this period in history. The Imperial Season is about Washington and a very particular period. It begins with the reception by President Grover Cleveland in his second term of the first ambassador ever assigned to the United States by a foreign country. It ends with the conclusion of World War I. It is a period and a story that suggests itself in all the buildings and landscapes that survive from it or its inspiration today. They help define Washington as it has come down to us from that time. A small portion of the book takes place here in Anderson House, for Lars and Isabel Anderson were characters in the Imperial Season. We can feast upon this setting tonight and imagine what it was like in, say, 1907, filled with guests, diplomats in their official gold-laden uniforms, women in court trains, that means 9 feet from the shoulder to the end to the hem, black and white evening clothes, some feathered headdresses with women who had been presented in court, 3 feathers. And in the dining room, a servant behind each chair, fitted out in powdered wig in 18th century attire, flowers, champagne, and music. To give some context, it was a 25-year period historically when America first felt the thrill of international importance. Isolated for so long, holding Europe in contempt for so long, the promise of a world position opened doors of monetary opportunity for some and intoxicated others with romantic appeal. Palaces, kings, a bridge across the Atlantic at last. And where more obvious for that new American power to express itself first than in a capital? Washington did here and here alone in this period. America's strong voice was first heard in 1895, when no-nonsense President Grover Cleveland threatened a military action against Britain and Venezuela if they did not settle their South American differences. He condemned them both for the defiance of the Monroe Doctrine. The sleeping giant had stirred, and it shocked the world to full notice. The second, and of course most powerful event, was that sword-swinging Spanish-American War in 1898. John Hay, then ambassador to St. James's, our splendid little war, called it a splendid little war, and that conflict sent America into possession of the Philippines and other parts of the South Pacific, and into a land war with Spain and Cuba. When the smoke cleared, the United States could at last call itself an international power, and world power, even if the latter would not be tested until the Great War. President William McKinley, in leading the nation into war, had taken the power of the presidency to the high and independent level it had not known since George Washington held the office. Chief executive now faded into the past. McKinley changed America, and had he lived, would have crowned the imperial season completely, but he didn't finish his second term. He was assassinated. In the 2 years before his assassination in 1901, he had supported more or less a redesign of Washington by the Army Corps of Engineers that included major improvements, new buildings, and a European sort of appearance. Architecturally, the remake was to be characterized more or less by the new Library of Congress. The Corps, which had wrenched the project from its architect designers and claimed it for its own, had completed the library, dazzled everyone, and were set to move from that work to redoing the rest of the city. They wished to begin as soon as possible, but they were abruptly unseated by non-governmental architects, members of the American Institute of Architects. Through the patronage of Senator James McMillan of Michigan, whom the Corps had insulted by not including in their plans, he was head of the D.C. committee, a whole new set of beautiful plans were made for Washington by professional architects who were working in private practice. At the time of the presentation of what came to be known as the Macmillan Plan, other changes had come. President McKinley was dead, assassinated in Buffalo. Theodore Roosevelt was his then very unlikely successor, so it was Roosevelt who toured the great presentation in 1901 at the Corcoran and heard the spiel about how the plan of the architects was a revival of L'Enfant's original scheme for Washington, approved by George Washington, but substantially improved further with inspiration from the Chicago World's Fair, held in 1893, 8 years before. Roosevelt's support was, of course, key. The architects wooed him further with a stylish Beaux-Arts renovation of the White House interior, turning a fringed and buttoned place into a sleek pseudo-French palace with great glass chandeliers. The East Room was patterned on a room in the Palace of Compiègne, while the dining room at the opposite end of the hall imitated an English-Georgian country house, complete with stuffed animal heads, actually bought from a decorator in New York named Hart, and not bagged by Teddy. I linger a little on the house because it was contemporary in taste with the one we enjoy tonight. The White House gave the new president a sort of bright, international, chic-looking stage that he wanted for the progressive administration yet to come. The Macmillan Plan, ultimately more a sketch than a detailed plan, was never to be adopted by Congress, but prevails today as the basic plan for Washington, studied and interpreted again and again. It is the hook upon which all